Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as read by Lord Naren White. Miss Watson, your runaway black Jim is down here 2 miles below Pikesville, and Mr. Phelps has got him, and he will give him up for the reward if you send. Huck Finn. I felt good and all washed clean of sin for the first time I had ever felt so in my life, and I knowed I could pray now. But I didn't do it straight off, but laid the paper down and sat there thinking how good it was all this happened so, and how near I come to being lost and going to hell. And went on thinking, and got to thinking over our trip down the river, and I see Jim before me all the time. In the day and in the night time, sometimes moonlight, sometimes storms, and we a floating along, talking and singing and laughing. But somehow I couldn't seem to strike no places to harden me against him, but only the other kind. I'd see him standing my watch on top of his'n, instead of calling me, so I could go on sleeping, and see him how glad he was when I come back out of the fog, and when I come to him again in the swamp, up there where the feud was, and such like times, and would always call me honey, and pet me, and do everything he could think of for me, and how good he always was. And at last I struck the time I saved him by telling the men we had smallpox aboard, and he was so grateful, and said I was the best friend old Jim ever had in the world, and the only one he's got now. And then I happened to look around and see that paper. It was a close place. I took it up and held it in my hand. I was a trembling because I'd got to decide forever betwixt two things, and I knowed it. I studied a minute, sort of holding my breath, and then says to myself, "All right, then I'll go to hell," and tore it up. It was awful thoughts and awful words, but they was said, and I let them stay said, and never thought no more about reforming. I shoved the whole thing out of my head and said I would take up wickedness again, which was in my line being brung up to it, and the other weren't. And for a starter I would go to work and steal Jim out of slavery again, and if I could think up anything worse, I would do that too. Because as long as I was in and in for good, I might as well go the whole hog. Then I set to thinking over how to get at it, and turned over some considerable many ways in my mind, and at last fixed up a plan that suited me. So then I took the bearings of a woody island that was down the river a piece, and as soon as it was fairly dark I crept out with my raft and went for it, and hid it there, and then turned in. I slept the night through and got up before it was light and had my breakfast and put on my store clothes and tied up some others and one thing or another in a bundle and took the canoe and cleared for shore. I landed below where I judged was Phelps' place and hid my bundle in the woods and then filled up the canoe with water and loaded rocks into her and sunk her where I could find her again when I wanted her. About a quarter of a mile below a little steam sawmill that was on the bank. Then I struck up the road, and when I passed the mill I see a sign on it, Phelps' Sawmill. And when I come to the farmhouses 200 or 300 yards further along, I kept my eyes peeled, but didn't see nobody around, though it was good daylight now. But I didn't mind, because I didn't want to see nobody just yet. I only wanted to get the lay of the land. According to my plan, I was going to turn up there from the village, not from below. So I just took a look and shoved along straight for town. Well, the first man I see when I got there was the Duke. He was sticking up a bill for the Royal Nonsuch 3-night performance, like that other time. They had the cheek, them frauds. I was right on him before I could shirk. He looked astonished and says, "Hello, where'd you come from?" Then he says, kind of glad and eager, "Where's the raft? Got her in a good place?" I says, "Why, that's just what I was going to ask your grace." Then he didn't look so awful and says, "What was your idea for asking me?" he says. Well, I says, when I see the king in that doggery yesterday, I says to myself, we can get him home for hours till he's sober. So I went a-loafing around town to put in the time and wait. A man up and offered me 10 cents to help him pull a skiff over the river and back to fetch a sheep. And so I went along. But when he was dragging him to the boat, and the man left me a hold of the rope, and went behind him to shove him along, he was too strong for me, and jerked loose and run, and we after him. We didn't have no dog, so we had to chase him all over the country till we tired him out. We never got him after till dark, and we fetched him over, and I started down for the raft. When I got there and see it was gone, I says to myself, they've got into trouble and had to leave, and they've took my black, which is the only black I've got in the world, and now I'm in a strange country, and ain't got no more, and no property no more, no nothing, and no way to make my living. So I sat down and cried. I slept in the woods all night, but what did become of the raft then? And Jim! Poor Jim! Blamed if I know. That is, what's become of the raft. That old fool had made a trade and got $40, and when we found him in the doggery, the loafers had matched $half with him, and got every cent but what he'd spent for whiskey. And when I got him home late last night and found the raft gone, we said, the little rascal has stole our raft and shook us and run off down the river. I wouldn't shake my black, would I? The only black I had in the world and the only property. We never thought of that. Fact is, I reckon we'd come to consider him our black, yes. We did consider him so. Goodness knows we had trouble enough for him. So when we see the raft was gone and we flat broke, there weren't anything for it but to try the Royal Nonsuch at another shake. And I've pegged along ever since, dry as a powder horn. Where's that 10 cents? Give it here. I had considerable money, so I give him 10 cents, but begged him to spend it for something to eat, and give me some, because it was all the money I had. And I hadn't had nothing to eat since yesterday. He never said nothing. The next minute he whirls on me and says, do you reckon that black would blow on us? We'd skin him if he done that. How can he blow? Ain't he run off? Oh, excuse me. It should be all the perspective of one voice. Do you reckon that black would blow on us? We'd skin him if he done that. How can he blow? Ain't he run off? Nah. That old fool sold him and never divided with me, and the money's gone. Sold him? I says, and begun to cry. Why, he was my black, and that was my money. Where is he? I want my black. Well, you can't get your black, that's all. So dry up your blubbering. Looky here, do you think you'd venture to blow on us? Blamed if I'd trust you. Why, if you was to blow on us... He stopped, but I never see the Duke look so ugly out of his eyes before. I went on a whimpering and says, I don't want to blow on nobody, and I ain't got no time to blow nohow. I got to turn out and find my black. He looked kinder bothered, and stood there with his bills fluttering on his arm, thinking and wrinkling up his forehead. At last he says, I'll tell you something. We got to be here 3 days. If you'll promise you won't blow and won't let the black blow, I'll tell you where to find him. So I promised, and he says, a farmer by the name of Silas then he stopped. You see, he started to tell me the truth, but when he stopped that way and begun to study and think again, I reckon he changed his mind. He was changing his mind, and so he was. He wouldn't trust me. He wanted to make sure of having me out of the way the whole 3 days. So pretty soon he says, the man that bought him is Abram G. Foster, and lives 40 miles back here in the country, on the road to Lafayette. All right, I says. I can walk it in 3 days, and I'll start this very afternoon. No, you won't. You'll start now. And don't you lose any time about it neither, nor do any gabbling by the way. Just keep a tight tongue in your head and move right along, and then you won't get into trouble with us. Do you hear? That was the order I wanted, and that was the one I played for. I wanted to be left free to work my plans. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.